of everlasting love to my old friend, Professor Wagner, and then 10 minutes later get jealous that he gets to talk to you all every day and to live in Long Beach, the agreement means nothing. The only way that a peace treaty really has any substance is if each of the people signing it slowly, one by one probably, comes to a more spacious and inclusive vision in herself or himself. And as soon as they do, then actually you don't even need a peace treaty. But the paper itself is really not going to resolve any situation. I read actually a couple of years ago in the TLS, the English paper, that they found in Northern Ireland that 2 men with shovels in a shed could construct a half-ton bomb. And when this fact was taken to the local police force, a senior officer there said, I thought very wisely, well, you know, there's no way you can decommission shovels. You've got to decommission minds. And I think that's exactly what the Dalai Lama is doing, trying really to revolutionize the world by going to the root of everything and not being distracted by the externals. So, having spent a lot of time with him, at the beginning of the century, all of us know that with the attacks on this country and then with the wars breaking out on the other side of the world, it seemed to me that more people than ever before were really horrified and appalled by what was being done in the name of a religion, many religions. At the same time, because of all the suffering, people more than ever before were reaching out for religion and the wisdom and solace that traditionally it provides. And I thought that that might be, and this might be, a good time to take a look at the Dalai Lama, because he's such a kind of counterintuitive figure. He's a religious leader who, when he comes to California next week, will tell people, don't get distracted or needlessly confused by religion. Don't lose yourself in texts or temples, rather than just looking at your human responsibilities around you. He's a Buddhist leader who, when he comes to the West, tells people, don't take up Buddhism. He's like an anti-missionary. Study within your own traditions, where your roots are deepest and where there's much less chance of projection or misperception. He's also a leader of a major school of Buddhism who spends a lot of time delivering talks on the Gospels, who's called himself a defender of Islam, and who spends a lot of time talking to scientists who probably have no religion, maybe even hostile to religion. And he nonetheless feels that he has something to learn from all of them and perhaps something to give to them. And so as I undertook my examination of him, I wasn't very interested in his warmth or his charisma, because I think that's been very well covered, and all of us know that he's a very kind and charming man. But I found that sometimes that almost got in the way of listening to what he was saying. I remember when I would hear him 20 years ago, I'd come out of the auditorium and I'd say, you know, what a twinkle in his eye, or what an attentive person, or what a sense of mischief. And all that is true, but when a doctor comes to your house, his bedside manner is important, but the most important thing is how efficacious is his prescription, is the medication he's handing out. And those of you who've heard the Dalai Lama speak know that he really travels as a scientist, and his favorite words are investigate, explore, analyze, and research. So I thought the best justice I could pay to this man was to investigate, analyze, explore, and research his thinking. And I think all of us in this room know that he's in a very unusual situation, really, because he's essentially a head of state. He's a leader of his people. He's also the head of Tibetan Buddhism. He's also a lifelong monk and a keen scientist and just a regular guy. And when you travel with him, and I'm lucky enough to travel with him every year, you see him moving at lightning speed between all these roles. He'll go into a room and talk very high, to me incomprehensible philosophy with some monks, and as he goes out of the room, he'll meet a 6-year-old girl, and he'll instantly talk to her and make some contact and be on her level. And then he'll get into a car and meet the president or prime minister of the country and talk about the very tangled, intricate political situation between China and Tibet. But what struck me as more interesting than that was the way that he takes all these different roles and pushes them together almost to see how each one can light up or can liberate the others. And by that, I mean, he's probably the only person I know in politics who is a monk, and therefore brings to the cut and thrust, very divisive world of politics the much more selfless and much more far-sighted vision of a monk. He's a politician who doesn't have to run for office, so he's thinking in terms of centuries and generations, not in terms of the next election. But at the same time, he's the only monk I know who holds very tenaciously to scientific principles, and who always says that as new scientific research finds the Buddha's teachings to be incomplete or wrong, then throughout the Buddha's teachings, science always trumps religion or trumps faith as far as he's concerned. And he has thrown out many parts of the Tibetan custom he grew up with, as science has found it to be inadequate to the reality of the world. And I think the other thing that made an impression on me was, as I said before, that really he's lived his whole life in a burning house. He's never been a wise man on a mountain just passing along the golden rule or telling us what we should or shouldn't do. He's been in the thick of it. As I was talking about before, he was a king when he was 4 years old. At the age of 7, he was already receiving envoys from the White House asking for the help with transportation of US supplies across Tibet in the middle of World War II. When he was 11, elementary school age, there was a civil war erupting around him in his capital of Lhasa. And then when he was 15, when most of us are just thinking about the junior prom or our first date, he was made full political leader of his people, having to go up one-on-one against Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, leaders of the world's largest and perhaps least tractable nation. And then, of course, when he was 24, he had the hardest thing of all for any leader, which is to try to reconstruct all his culture outside his own borders in exile. And I think that's part of what allows him to be so pragmatic and really never to look for the wishful or the fanciful solution. He's never had that luxury. I remember I once went in to see him and he said, "You know, I'm addicted." And I thought, gosh, that's not what I expected. What could a Dalai Lama be addicted to? Compassion? Well, certainly. Impermanence? Probably. Emptiness? Yes. But no, he said, "I'm addicted to the BBC World Service report every morning." And he told me very sweetly that every morning during his first 4 hours of meditation, he always listens to the news. And he said that when he travels, and because of the time difference, he can't hear the daily news report, he really feels that something fundamental is missing from his life. Usually when I go into his room, there's a half-overturned copy of the day's newspaper on his desk, and I think he follows world events more closely than I and most of the journalists I know do. And I think that's what allows him to take this somewhat liberating vision of the world around us. When I hear him, I get the sense that, for example, the war on terrorism will never be won so long as there are people so desperate to prosecute their unhappiness with us that they'll give up their lives. But the war on terror, which is the war on the fear in us that precipitates those attacks, and the fear in those desperate souls that moves them to take on suicide missions, that war can be won in every heart at any moment. It's a very slow incremental process, but any one of us can actually begin to change the way that plays out in our lives. As I mentioned before, he is always trying to see what is at the cause or the source of the actions and consequences we see in the world. Some of you probably know that China recently set up a high-speed train linking Lhasa in Tibet to Beijing and Shanghai and other cities. And most Tibetans I know rose up in arms and said, "This is the last nail in the coffin of our culture. This is a way for China just to flood Tibet with Chinese and essentially to obliterate Tibet from the map." And the Chinese government replied, I think with some justice, "No, no, no. This is an act of great compassion, and this is how we're going to bring material benefits and modernity to your very isolated and rather underdeveloped territory." And the Dalai Lama was the only person I know who said, "It doesn't matter about the train. A train is neither positive nor negative. It's completely neutral. The only important thing is the motivation and the thinking of the people in charge of the train. And if they're compassionate, it will indeed be one of the greatest blessings that Tibetans have ever enjoyed. And if they're ruthless, then it becomes unforgivable. But let's not concentrate on the train. That really has nothing to do with it." And we were talking earlier, and Bipasha in her introduction was talking about global community. And again, I think all these ideas in the realm of geopolitics actually have real-life consequences for us if we choose to follow them. I remember not so long ago, I was walking up a hill in Hiroshima with the Dalai Lama to visit a little temple on a mountain. And as he was walking, suddenly a young woman came forward. "Lama, Dalai Lama, I've got to meet you, I'm God, please come and see me." And of course, the bodyguards pulled her away, and he went into a little temple, and he just sat there and meditated for a few minutes, and I was next to him, and as we were sitting in the temple, we could hear her shrieking outside. And then when he came out, as soon as he came out of the temple, he motioned to the security, and he said, "Please bring that woman to me." And they brought her to him, and he just held her face